Welcome back for another Sheriff of Sodium video. Today I'm going to share a version of a talk that I got to give last week to a group of MD-PhD students. This was for their career development series, and of all people, they asked me to give some advice about how to successfully navigate a career in academia. So this is what I talked about: surviving in academic medicine, advice from a non-survivor. I'm going to start here with a story that you all probably already know. The year is 1943. World War II is in full swing, and the outcome remains very much in doubt. Nazi Germany held most of continental Europe, and so, to try to slow down Hitler's war machine, the United States and its allies began a strategic bombing campaign. But instead of focusing on military targets, the goal was to destroy factories and oil refineries and transportation networks, the infrastructure Germany needed to keep its armies moving forward. But even these softer targets proved to be quite formidable. To precisely target their bombs, the missions had to be conducted in broad daylight, which meant that German anti-aircraft gunners had a great opportunity to pick off American bombers right out of the clear blue sky. And as 1943 wore on, the German air defense seemed to be getting more hardened and efficient. On one notorious mission in October, 291 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers were sent to destroy a ball-bearing factory in Schweinfurt. Over 20% of them never came back, and 60% of the rest of the planes sustained major battle damage, some so severe the planes had to be scrapped. It was clear that losses like this were not sustainable, so military leaders turned to Abraham Wald, a mathematics professor at Columbia University, and asked him to analyze the situation. Obviously, American bombers needed to be reinforced so that they could withstand German anti-aircraft guns. But armor's heavy. You can't armor up the whole plane, won't be able to get off the ground. So how much armor was necessary and where it should be installed, these were critical questions that had to be rigorously answered. To begin, military officials gave Wald some data, including the locations of the bullet holes that they'd recorded in planes that were returning from missions. The initial intuition of the military engineers was that they should reinforce the areas that seemed to be sustaining the most battle damage, like the wings and the fuselage. Wald disagreed. He had a crucial insight. The heat map that you see here was constructed by evaluating only the planes that survived. The bullet holes that the Army engineers could see and were counting were in the very locations in which a plane could take a hit and still make it back to base. Instead of reinforcing those locations, instead they should focus on armoring the engines and the cockpit. These were the critical zones, but they don't show up in the data because planes hit in those locations never made it home. Now, Wald's insight here has become a well-known and highly publicized example of a particular type of bias called survivorship bias. And as future scientists, you already know this, and you're quite aware of many of the situations in which it applies. But I think that one area in which we don't always see survivorship bias is in success testimonials. You probably know the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Listen to the award speeches at your professional society's annual meeting, or read the reflective essays that still get published in journals, or listen to the good faith advice of your senior mentors who have ascended to the very top of the academic medicine pyramid. You're going to hear a lot of life lessons about embracing failure and the value of perseverance and following your passion and taking big chances or whatever else. And make no mistake, these things are probably good advice. Just keep in mind, the people giving it are survivors. They're people who won the game of academic medicine by publishing their papers and getting their grants funded and getting their promotions. If they hadn't done these things, they wouldn't be in a position to be giving advice to young people who want to be like them. But what's missing here are the voices of people who followed those same pieces of advice and failed. The planes who never made it home. So I say all this as a lengthy prelude to congratulate you for your intellectual courage and openness in choosing to seek advice from someone who's not a winner in academic medicine. I don't publish very many papers. I've never run a successful lab. I've actually never even run an unsuccessful lab. Over the course of my career, I have won a grand total of $0 and 0 cents in NIH grant funding. And of course, none of these things make me especially well qualified to speak to a group like this today, but at the very least, you know my opinions aren't going to be biased by having had these experiences. But what I am, I think, is an observer of systems. And I shouldn't have to tell you that the future of current MD-PhD students is more uncertain than I think it's ever been since the MSTP program began in 1964. I mean, you all are going to have to navigate a more complex, competitive, and corporatized environment than your predecessors ever had to. So, for whatever it's worth, today I'm going to share 10 things that I hope will help you as you do that. Number 1 is this: think hard about your goals. Now, this may seem like a silly thing to say because as clinician investigators, you're going to have to think harder about your goals than anyone else. You don't get to be undecided. An MD-PhD doesn't get the luxury of saying, I don't know, or I'm still thinking about it, or I'm going to do this until I figure things out. I mean, at least you don't get to say those things if you're trying to get funding. Because if you're trying to do that, you're going to have to set out with some specificity your goals and career development plan on every NIH grant you ever submit. So MD-PhDs get really good at setting goals, but really they get very good at setting goals of a particular type. And that's the type of goal that looks good to someone else. Now, I want to spend a minute talking about this because I think it's one of the most pernicious things that I see in academic medicine. There's a lot of people who, by any objective standard, are wildly successful. They're winners, but they don't feel like it. They've made it to the top of the mountain, but they don't seem to be enjoying it very much. They're burned out. And there's a lot that goes into that. And by telling you this next thing that I'm going to tell you, I don't mean to diminish the importance of systemic factors and the need for systemic fixes. But there is a common lesion. There is a common thread in many of these cases. And it's something that happens inside your own head. And so I hope as you proceed into your own career, you're going to take some measures to guard against it. What I'm talking about is playing the game. Just becoming a physician, much less becoming the kind of physician that successfully ascends the pyramid of academic medicine, it requires convincing multiple layers of gatekeepers that you're deserving of opportunity. You got to be good, but you also have to be good at playing the game of looking good to others. To have gotten to where you all are now, you've already had to play the game. And you're going to have to keep playing it to one extent or another as you seek out residency and fellowship and faculty positions. I mean, look, I know how things work. Not playing is not an option. But I just want you to be careful about the way that you play. Here's what I mean. The thing about playing the game is that when you play it too much, you start to develop muscle memory. At the very least, you develop this ever-present awareness of where you stand, or I guess I should say where you think you stand relative to others. But as you keep playing more and more, thinking about how others perceive you and what others think of you, or what other people expect from you, or how to impress other people and ensure that you can convince them that you're deserving enough to pass through the next gate, all that becomes your default setting. And if you're not careful, that becomes autonomous, and it starts to cut against your real goals and desires and satisfaction. Because let me share with you right now a grand truth of academics. No matter how much of something you have, grants, titles, publications, whatever it is that you're toiling to obtain, there's always going to be someone who's got more of it. And there's always something more that you could chase. There's another brass ring right in front of you, just barely outside your grasp. If your means for valuing yourself becomes your success in playing the game, you will never feel like a success. So I guess what I'm really telling you is, be honest about your goals. I mean, every man needs a quest. It's good to have a goal of understanding a molecular pathway or unlocking a mechanism of disease. And it's perfectly okay to have some goals that are surrogates for steps along the way, like winning a certain grant or getting a promotion. But you should always have a collection of goals that are not things that you put in your NIH biosketch. What are your values? I mean, why did you get into this thing in the first place? What does a win look like to you? Even if it's not necessarily a win to people who are looking at you from the outside. Because if you choose to not reach out for that next brass ring, whatever it is, you need to be able to feel like you've made a mission-driven decision whenever you choose not to play the game. You can't just tell yourself, oh, I don't care about playing the game. You have to be able to say, I spent extra time with this patient because they needed it, and that's my brand. I took time to sleep or work out because staying healthy is important to me. It's a win. I unplugged when I was with my family because being a good spouse or a good parent, that's what I'm here to do. That was a success. So be honest with yourself about these things. You will never feel like a winner if you use someone else's definition of winning. Say whatever you need to say in your career development plan, but always be honest with yourself. Let me move on to number 2. If you want to be maximally successful, assess your competitive advantage. Over the next few years, as you finish your training, you're going to have to make some very impactful decisions about what exactly you're going to study and how you're going to study it. So as you confront those questions, let me give you a little warning. High-functioning people often succeed in areas where they lack a whole lot of raw talent. I mean, you see this all the time. Most often, they do it by simply outworking problems. You study longer and harder, and so you outperform someone where those skills come more easily. There's a lot of value in that. And actually, I'll go ahead and put it to you that if you don't have the fortitude to put your head down and work through some stuff that doesn't come naturally to you, you're probably not going to be successful in much of anything. But here's the thing. As you continue to level up, you're going to reach the limits of that strategy. You're eventually going to have to confront the hard reality that all of us only have 24 hours a day. And although our physiologic need for sleep or exercise or the companionship of other humans may vary somewhat, these are still deep-seated biological needs, and you simply cannot, you will not be able to overpower every single problem that you come across by just working harder. You're going to need to work smarter. And I think it will help you immensely if you focus your smart work on areas where you already have the greatest natural advantages. To quote chemical engineering PhD and famous GE CEO and business legend Jack Welch, if you don't have a competitive advantage, don't compete. Again, this is a time for brutal honesty. I mean, what are you better at than the average person? What comes naturally to you? Think broadly and make a list of all these things. Be comprehensive. Some people do this and then they kind of discard it because they think the things they came up with aren't directly relevant to their career goals. Don't make that mistake. Look for opportunities to do things in different ways. You are entering a field where very many successful people, they really only had one good idea, but then they took it farther and faster than anyone else. Let me move on now to number 3. If you want to be happy in academic medicine, remember, this is your career, not Chuck E. Cheese. Now this one, I'm going to have to explain a bit. It's probably been a few years since most of you all have been to a Chuck E. Cheese, and some of you may have never had that experience ever, so let me tell you what it's like. Usually it started with an invitation to a birthday party, and you'd pull up to this giant arcade, not unlike the one pictured here, with a big gray mouse outside. And you'd go inside and you'd play the games and you'd eat the pizza and you'd have a great time until you presented with a horrible infectious enteritis the following day. But before that happened, it was a blast. The games were fun, and every time you played a game, depending on your score, you would earn a certain number of tickets. And then, before you left, you could stop by a counter that looked like this one, and you could exchange those tickets for prizes. Now, obviously, there was a hierarchy among prizes. I mean, that spirograph up on top there, well, that's going to set you back 8,000 tickets. If you didn't have that much, well, I don't know, maybe you want the poop emoji plushie or a little super soaker. And if you were really pinched, they still had lots of little prizes that so, you might be able to walk away with a few pieces of sour candy or a little sticky hand that you could slap your brother with. But the thing about the Chuck E. Cheese economy is, the thing that's relevant to what I'm trying to talk about today, is that most of the time, it was the number of tickets that you had that determined what you wanted. I mean, if you had 300 tickets, you were going to get the fidget spinner that cost 300 tickets, even if you might have rather had the fake finger that cost only 200 tickets, because, I mean, why are you going to leave resources on the table? You got to spend all the tickets. However many tickets you got, you want to redeem them for the most valuable item that you can possibly get. This is the thing I see occur in academic medicine, and I see it in some medical students all the way up to the highest ranking deans. I mean, I've had students tell me, in my heart, I always wanted to do pediatrics, but Then I scored a 270 on USMLE Step 2 CK, so I'm selling myself short if I don't apply to dermatology or ENT. Or, I really wanted to go to this residency program because it fits my goals and it would be right with my significant other, but I feel like I've got to rank such and such big name program as my number one because, it's such and such big name program. If you're not careful, the Chuck E. Cheese economy can sneak into every decision. Which research mentor do you want? Which faculty job should you take? Why, the most valuable one you can get with the number of tickets you have, of course. The problem with this is that you're letting someone else decide what's valuable, instead of deciding for yourself what it is you want and then figuring out if the price you have to pay is worth it. Mark my words. If you always choose to redeem your tickets for their maximum value as determined by the prevailing academic medicine exchange rate, you will inevitably wake up one day to find that you are burned out. And if that's not reason enough to pursue a more deliberate strategy, then let me give you one more reason, which is that sometimes this strategy actually derails previously promising careers. See, if you do good work, people will eventually ask you to do lots of other things that are kind of adjacent to that work. Wouldn't you like to chair the IRB? Or direct this research institute? Or be the vice dean of research? And maybe you would, and if you do, that's great. But if you say yes because that's the highest value item you can get right now with your tickets, you may find yourself in a situation where you have too much on your plate and you aren't particularly well suited to do the jobs that you have. Remember what I said a moment ago about being honest about your competitive advantage? Doing unexceptional work in a position that you don't really want and don't think you're particularly good at isn't a stepping stone. It's a dead end. Because then, if your new dream opportunity somewhere else comes up and you apply for it and they're looking at you, who do you think's going to be a better candidate? The person that seems like they're in over their head and who now has an established track record of mediocrity, or an enthusiastic hotshot who stayed in their wheelhouse? The point is, it's okay to say no, especially if your goal is career happiness and not just unbridled careerism. If your goal is to be happy, it's important to know when you have enough. And even if your goal is just to be successful by someone else's standard, I still think you'll be best positioned to succeed by doing things you love and things that you think you're very good at. Some opportunities and promotions will fit that bill, and some won't. Let me move on now to number 4. Loyalty needs limits. Loyalty is a valuable human trait, and it's frequently rewarded in life and in academic medicine. Just don't take it too far. Here, I'll quote Dr. Joseph Simone, a giant of pediatric oncology who wrote one of the most famous papers about success in academic medicine. It's worth a read, and I'll link to it in the notes below. But in the paper, he reflects on his career in academia, and he sets out some maxims. And the very first one of them is this: institutions don't love you back. To quote from his paper, quote, "The relationship between a trainee, faculty member, or employee in the institution is impersonal and contractual. One cannot expect the same consideration as one may receive in a family," end quote. And this is a dose of cold, hard reality that, at some point, your future self may need to hear. No matter how much you love your university, no matter how much you bleed the school colors, there will come a time when you will leave for one reason or another, and when you do, in a pretty short period of time, it will be as if you were never there at all. The machine will grind on. So treasure the friendships that you have with your mentors and your colleagues, but just keep a line in your head about where the friendship ends and contractual obligation begins. You should value friendship and you should honor contracts, but don't let blind loyalty keep you in a position where you aren't happy or valued or successful. Next, number 5, develop a healthy relationship with competition. To frame this, I'm going to give you a quote from Robert Reich, who, in addition to having spent a significant portion of his career in high-ranking government positions, is also a full professor at the University of California, Berkeley. Quote, In Washington, it's dog eat dog. In academia, it's just the opposite." End quote. So for those of you who aspire to use both your MD and PhD and become funded clinical investigators, you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that you are in constant competition with your peers. And I'm not talking about soft competition for name recognition or promotion, these things that comprise a significant amount of this dog-eat-dog world that's being described. I'm talking about the bare knuckles, teeth and nails, zero-sum game of getting your own research funded. In recent history, only around 1 in 5 R01 grant proposals have been funded. So if you want to be in that 20% of people who get to do what they've spent their whole life training to do, instead of in the 80% where the very career and livelihood that they've fought for are on the chopping block, then you need to outwit, outlast, and outplay your competition. But like I pointed out a moment ago, we all only have 24 hours a day, and every hour that you spend doing something other than advancing your research, there's someone, somewhere, who spent that hour grinding out data and publications so that they could get ahead of you. And you're going to have to figure out how you're going to come to terms with and handle this fact. There's some people who go all in. They fully embrace the Game of Thrones aspects of academics, and they take an intense interest in who's allied with whom and who's with them and who's against them, and they work relentlessly and they fuel themselves with insecurity and indignation. And there are others that embrace constant multitasking, and you'll see these people, on their laptop, wordsmithing a grant or cleaning a data set while they're sitting on the beach watching their kids out of the corner of their eye. Sometimes the people who take these kind of approaches, they compete well. And sometimes they end up anxious and old, burned down to a nub from academic diastolic heart failure. So you're going to have to decide how you want to handle things, how you're going to frame competition in your own mind, how hot you want to burn, and where you're going to draw lines. Be intentional as you make those decisions, because if you ask me, having a successful career means doing more than just winning. It means having a life that you're happy with. I'm going to move on now to number 6, build founder skills. Now, just a moment ago, I showed you this, and I shared some less than encouraging statistics about the likelihood of getting an NIH grant funded in recent years. But for decades, that's how you won in academic medicine. Unfortunately, as you already know, that game has gotten a lot harder. The average age of R01 PIs has steadily risen over time. These days, it's around 45. But to put that in some perspective, 40 years ago, 1 in 6 awardees was aged 36 or younger. Now, over time, that proportion has steadily declined, and we now have more PIs who are eligible for Social Security than we do funded investigators in that age group. Also, the pot of money available to fund science has been stagnant. This graphic comes from the AAMC, and the green bars show the nominal dollars that Congress has allocated for NIH funding. But what I want you to pay attention to are the purple bars, where those dollar amounts have been adjusted for inflation. And notice how those purple bars are flat. Notice also that the x-axis on this graphic only goes to 2024, and a lot has changed just since then. This year, the number of NIH grants rejected has more than doubled. And it's not going to get better. The President's 2026 budget calls for a 43% reduction to NIH funding compared to 2025 levels. And I'm not even going to get into the fight over capping indirect costs, which is currently held up in court, or the freezes on grants that have been deemed to be associated with DEI or woke science. Suffice to say, what all of this means for young investigators is that there's severe uncertainty over the old road to academic medicine success. And although I try pretty hard to steer clear of politics on this channel, I'm going to offer my opinion that I don't see this changing. Not in a sustained way, regardless of the party in power. With a polarized electorate and a rising budget deficit and bitter fights over everything related to both taxes and spending, it's just hard for me to imagine more public dollars going to support research and researchers in the near future. I think the golden days of NIH funding are well in our rearview mirror at this point. And yet, Many of your mentors and role models who won in this old system, they're preparing you to succeed in a game that at best is a lot harder and at worst may no longer even exist. Now, research will still get funded because the return on investment for good biomedical research is high. But the funders themselves are going to change. Instead of the government, you're going to need to look at foundations and industry and, yes, venture capital. So to win in this new era, you're going to need new skills, the kind of skills that startup founders have. You'll need to know the art of the pitch, because the success of your proposal will no longer be exclusively in the hands of a bespectacled senior academic. The purse strings are going to be controlled by people who have different incentives, and you're going to need to communicate not just scientific merit, but also return on investment. Now, some scientists are very uncomfortable selling their ideas like this, but clinician investigators who have the ability to communicate clearly and concisely and craft a presentation into a compelling narrative with a business punchline, those people are going to be the winners in the future. You'll also need some business literacy. When you understand how dollars flow, it's much easier to craft your pitch in a way that aligns your incentives with the incentives of the payer. It'll help also if you understand the framework of cost effectiveness and risk management, because these are a couple of the lenses through which your proposals are going to be evaluated. Also, you'll need a nose for opportunity. Rather than spending your career doggedly pursuing a single research question, I think this new system is going to reward those who have the ability to pivot quickly and pounce on opportunities as they present themselves. You need to maintain some clarity of purpose, sure, but in highly competitive markets, the ability to strike quickly and decisively will be an incredible advantage. And last, you'll need to work on network building, but in a slightly different way than your predecessors did. Just like startup founders need warm introductions, investigators need connections to funders and thought leaders because, again, in a very competitive market, many funders aren't going to want to advertise what they're doing to their competition by making some grand open call for proposals. But if you and your work are known by the right people, they'll come looking for you. Time to move on to number 7. Carefully configure clinical time. As an MD-PhD, one of the very hardest decisions that you're going to have to make and keep making repeatedly through your whole career is how much time to devote to patient care and how much time to devote to research. You do too little clinical work and you lose skills and credibility. But you do too much and you're going to struggle to sustain a lab program, particularly when you're competing against people who devote 100% of their time to that very thing. Now, what the right balance is for you, I don't know. But as you decide, let me offer just a couple of observations. First, get your 10,000 hours. I'm alluding here, of course, to the idea that was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell in his 2008 book, Outliers, that the threshold you need to reach expertise is 10,000 hours of focused, deliberate practice. You're going to get a lot of this in your residency and fellowship, and it's going to be doled out to you in 80-hour per week chunks. But even then, just a minority of residents or fellows leave their training feeling like experts, and even fewer actually are. There is an incredible amount of growth that occurs in your first couple of years of clinical practice when all the decisions are yours to make. And I think there's a real risk in spending too much time in the lab and missing that critical developmental stage. I promise you will see, if you haven't already, some clinician investigators who really never get comfortable taking care of patients. They feel like an imposter, and they come to dread when that 25% of their FTE comes up. And this is not how you want to be. It's not the relationship you want to have with your work. And so my advice would be, especially if you want to take care of patients throughout your career, lean into this early on and build up your decision-making muscles. Second, honor your values. If you choose to take care of patients, you should feel good about that. As a clinician, I obviously feel like that's our highest calling. But when you're dealing with the competing pressures of becoming a funded investigator, it can be hard to see it that way. I spoke a moment ago about coming to terms with the intense competition you're going to face in academics, and honestly, your clinical work can become ground zero for that. Because however much clinical time you choose to do Many of your competitors will choose to do zero. They don't have clinic. They don't cover the inpatient service. They spend every minute of their working life on research. So every minute that you spend answering epic in-basket messages or rounding on the weekend, they're out there getting ahead of you. And when you realize this, it can be hard not to start to look at patient care as something that you've just got to get through so that you can get back to the lab or your manuscript or your grant, because those are the things that really matter. Those are what you're being judged on. Those are the things that are going to get you funding or a pat on the head or a promotion, not taking care of this person in front of you. And it should be obvious that's not the headspace that you want to be in either. So if you think that patient care is important, honor your values. You should feel good checking up on that patient that you were worried about. You should feel good spending a few extra minutes at the bedside or calling a family member to give them an update, because these things, although they're not strictly efficient, they're things that honor your values, and you have every right to feel good about them. But I want to be clear about one other thing too. You don't have to keep options open. I mean, I get it. You're going to give up nearly a decade of your youth to earn both an MD and PhD. So it's understandable after all that toil that you feel like you have a requirement, an obligation to use both degrees. You don't. For some people, the right balance of clinical work is 25-75 or 75-25. But for other people, it's 100-0 or 0-100. Bear in mind that there are literally thousands of us who have only one of these degrees, and yet here we are, having rich and satisfying careers. I mean, it's good to keep options open if you actually want those options, but don't let this sunk cost fallacy become a millstone around your neck. Do what you want. You don't have to answer to anybody but yourself. That actually leads naturally to my 8th point. Do what you love. Now, this is very common career advice, and I'm going to be honest, it's common because it's good advice. It can and should be applied to all kinds of impactful decisions that are about to be coming for you, from what specialty you're going to choose to what problems you should study. But I think what makes this advice hard to implement isn't recognizing that it's good advice. It's figuring out, what is it that I love? I mean, in a way, it's just like a relationship. I mean, you feel some initial attraction. You like hanging out with each other. But how do you know it's really love and not just some summer fling? I think, just like with a regular relationship, there will be signs of love if you know where to look. Curiosity is a sign of love. I think it's one of the strongest signs of love. If you want to know more about something, I mean, if you naturally want to go deeper and deeper, if you can imagine yourself still being curious and wanting to learn more about it in 5, 10, 50 years, you may be in love. Another thing that may help you is what I call the tired test. I mean, you all know when life gets more hectic and you get tired, certain things fall by the wayside in your life. So what are the things that you still have energy for? I mean, even when it's been a long day, are you excited to look at these data or to do this add-on case when you've already been there all day? I mean, if you are, then your heart is trying to tell you something, and you probably should listen to it. Another thing that may help you find love is the old saying, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back, it's yours. If not, it was never meant to be. Sometimes you get caught up in a particular rotation or project, and then it ends, or something happens and you got to step away from it for a little while. And when you do, you're okay with that. But other times you may find that your mind keeps going back to that place. And again, if you feel that, it's a sign of love. Last, just like in a human relationship, you marry the family. So when you choose your specialty or your field of study, do you like the people that are already there? And when you go to the meeting, do you want to be like these people, or do you feel out of place? I mean, just like your in-laws, your colleagues can become an incredible blessing in your life or a thorn in your side. If you look around and say, yes, I have found my people, you're probably in love. And now it's time to wind down with my final point. Be skeptical. Now, some of you may have noticed at the beginning of this talk, I promised you 10 pieces of advice. Well, you're only going to get 9, so be skeptical. Don't believe everything you hear. Similarly, a few minutes ago, I alluded to the 10,000 hour rule, and although I firmly believe your clinical decision-making will improve significantly in your first couple of years of attendinghood, you should be aware, if you weren't already, that this rule itself is oversimplified and not really well-grounded in evidence. There's no magic number for clinical care or anything else. The best advice is to understand, as Gladwell pointed out himself in a later essay, that in cognitively demanding tasks, there are no naturals. Earlier in this talk, I also quoted a few famous professors who made points that I think are both correct and relevant to this topic. But I also introduced this talk with the idea of survivorship bias, and these guys are some of the biggest survivors in their field, so taking their advice without taking that into consideration does have a certain similarity to counting the bullet holes in a B-17 that came back from a bombing run. My real point is, if you want to be a clinician investigator, if you're interested in understanding the truth, then keeping a little bit of skepticism will help you do that, and it will make your career more fun. So at least every now and then, read the references. Redo the old experiment yourself. You're going to get a level of understanding that you won't get if you just take that little numeric superscript as the final authority. As a matter of fact, when I was making this talk, I decided to go back and pull Abraham Wald's original paper. And when I did, I'm going to be honest, I couldn't understand hardly any of it. So if you want to get your hair blown back by the force of about 80 pages of mathematics, I'll link to that paper below. But what surprised me was I couldn't find a diagram like the one that makes its way around the internet all the time with the little red dots on the plane wings and fuselage like I showed you at the beginning of this talk. The manuscript was actually extremely technical, and the closest thing I could find was this table, which was in an appendix. Turns out, this story about survivorship bias that we've come to love, that's become a meme on the internet, it isn't necessarily based on an authoritative historical record. A Canadian mathematics professor dug deep into the primary sources and noted, "The story might well be true, but there's very little evidence for the best bits. Most of the story is, to use a charitable phrase, plausible reconstruction." So before I get your mind spinning and discredit myself anymore, I'm going to stop here. Once again, and as always, thanks for listening.